I guess an unusual item for the Tales series is the All Divide, where everybody, including you and the enemies, all take half as much damage. So you have more time to kind of think through fights, and it makes fights take a very, very long time.
And some other things that are kind of common to the entire series as a whole. We have your plot twists. These are the points in the game at which it goes from being a cliche-filled kind of generic RPG story to there's stakes now, and your characters are maybe getting a little bit broken, and so are we, and the whole story changes from there. We have a cooking system, which has been present in basically the entire series. You get food items, and they can be combined in interesting ways by different characters to give you status boosts in battles, or to like heal you at certain health thresholds or things like that. And that's always a fun thing. You had a thing about cooking.
Oh, the cooking system is also a fun way that the series distinguishes characters from each other. They all often have different ways of cooking dishes and different abilities to cook. If you all played Symphonia, which I assume most of you have, that's the really popular one, you might remember that Sheena likes to put pineapple in curry. So if Sheena is your chef and you have pineapple and the other ingredients for curry, she'll put it in the curry, and you'll probably get a skit out of it. On the other hand, if you have Rain as your cook, Rain can only make only make a sandwich using bread and can fail. So it plays into the uniqueness of the characters.
We also have the grade system. This is a system by which generally after every battle, but sometimes it tallies things up at the end of the game, you get a grade, which basically tells you how well you're doing, and this adds points to what is for the most part an invisible counter that you find out at the end of the game how much grade you got. And when you want to start a new game off of your save file, you can go to the grade shop, where you can use your grade to buy, like you can carry over, your skills that you learned in your previous playthrough, or you can enable earn 10 times as much experience to play through really fast, I guess, and things like that. Your stuff that you don't want to repeat in a new playthrough, and other bonus stuff like extra difficulties and costumes.
Yeah, if you're like a hardcore collectionist and you like to fill out the collector's book or the enemy book, which is like literally have every single item you can get in the game or fight every single thing you can fight in the game and use a scanning on it, you are crazy if you don't do New Game Plus 1-to-1. It's basically impossible to do in one playthrough. Sometimes it's actually impossible to do in one playthrough.
Yeah. And the series is also pretty famous for its soundtrack by this little square gentleman here, surrounded by keyboards. His name is Motoi Sakuraba, and he's a big fan of two things: generic-sounding RPG tunes and crazy noodly prog rock. There are a couple exceptions to this. There's I think 2 games in the entire series that he has not worked on.
Yeah.
But we were going to have a sample of his music, but our audio is not working like it ought to, so apologies.
Fun fact, he also did the soundtrack to Dark Souls, which does not sound like the Tales soundtrack.
And if you want to find things that do sound like Tales soundtracks, maybe play a Mario Tennis game, because they're so exactly the same.
Or go listen to the Yes album.
That's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But now that we have all of the basics of the series down, let's just talk about all of the individual games, starting from 1995 all the way to today. So, like I said, the very first game is Tales of Fantasia, and it came out in 1995 at a time when JRPGs were the hotness. They were, Final Fantasy was really big at the time. It was I think this was right before Final Fantasy VI.
Yeah, and this is when Dragon Quest was really making big strides in Japan.
Dragon Quest was really big. And Tales of Fantasia was kind of a new thing, because they were, really going for action fighting in an RPG. It was made by a studio under a company called Telenet Japan, and the studio was called Wolf Team. They had in the past worked on, most notably, a series of action, like hack and slash platformers that was called Valis, and they decided they wanted to make an RPG out of a novel that one of the team members had written and never published. And so they put together this game, and it's it kind of set the foundation of what would become the Tales series. It's got your action battles, even if they're a little bit slow and clunky and tedious at this point, and it has it's got the food system. Was a pretty big thing, except instead of cooking, you have you just kind of put all of your food into a bag, and then it heals you as you walk around. which is simple but not, I don't know, I wouldn't call it fun.
Man, it's not interesting.
And it, was somewhat of a hit. It was a little bit late in the Super Nintendo's, or the Super Famicom, I suppose, lifetime, but it did well enough for them. However, when they were trying to get it published, they came to Namco and they were like, hey, we've got this cool game, we think you should publish it. And Namco was like, yeah, great, sure, but you have to make a bunch of changes to it. And they changed some story elements, they changed some characters, and they actually changed the title as well. It was originally intended to be titled Tale Fantasia, which was the novel that this story was based on. They changed the title to Tales of Fantasia, and that clearly has stuck since then. But the team that made the game was a little bit displeased with how much Namco had messed with it. So they split off and decided to form their own company, which they called Tri-Ace, which is famous for something called Star Ocean. And if you have played a Star Ocean game, this is probably obvious to you because they are an awful lot like Tales games. The first Star Ocean came out not too long after Tales of Fantasia, and it was a pretty similar game all around. It's got, it had the same deal where there was voice acting on the Super Famicom, which was like a crazy awesome thing at the time, and it had battle mechanics that are fairly similar. You can tell it's a different enough game, but it still feels like you're running around hacking and slashing at things in random encounters.
Yeah, the series is called Tales of Space sometimes as a joke.
So if you like Tales games and you have played enough of them and you want to try something a little bit different, maybe go play Star Ocean. But that's all that we're going to talk about that game for now, because this isn't a Star Ocean panel. So then, in 1997, came Tales of Destiny, and this was the first game in the series to come out in the West, which was exciting, or it would have been if it hadn't been drowned out by another RPG that came out in 1997 on the PlayStation. But this was essentially a new development team's take on Tales of Fantasia. Telenet Japan hired a whole bunch of new people to come in and take the place, essentially, of the people who left after Tales of Fantasia, and they kept the name Wolf Team. And they kind of did more or less a retread of what Tales of Fantasia had been. It's a similar enough game. It's got basically the same battle mechanics, and it it's got the same food system. And in a new thing for the series, it had co-op, and that has become a mainstay of this series to this day. However, it was pretty limited. Player 1 could only ever play as the main character, Stan, and anybody else who wants to play along, they have to get a specific accessory and then equip it to a specific character and then move that character to a slot that matches the controller they're using, and you can do this sometimes. It's not, I wouldn't call it convenient. But this kept the series going, and a year after that, there was a remake of Tales of Fantasia for the PlayStation. It was made by this new team that was Japan only, unfortunately, but it did include the cooking system for the first time and made co-op play a little bit easier. It was Tales of Fantasia again.
It should be noted that this is a series of installments where each game is an independent set of new characters, new plot, yada yada.
That's true. There's not usually direct sequels.
Yeah, a la Final Fantasy.
So the next game to come out was Tales of Eternia, which also made its way westward. And this was kind of, if Tales of Destiny was a retread of where Tales of Fantasia had already been, Tales of Eternia was a whole new beast on the same framework. Fighting combat was really quick and snappy, and co-op was what has come today to be like the drop in and drop out co-op like we have. It had voice acting in cutscenes, even if that voice acting is not the best thing, at least in the English version. And it also introduced a character that I love called the Wonder Chef, who's somebody who hides in various locations around the world, and there's if you are in a place and you see an object that looks like it doesn't belong here, you can look at it and it's like, oh no, it was actually the Wonder Chef. You found me, I'll teach you how to cook. And then he teaches you a new recipe. It's great. I love the Wonder Chef. Mm-hmm. And you may have noticed, if you don't know about this already, the picture of the box art here doesn't say Tales of Eternia, it says Tales of Destiny 2. And there's a fun story about that. You may be familiar with a property called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which, you may know, is set in a place called Eternia. And that means that Mattel had a trademark on the word Eternia, which means that Namco couldn't use that for the title of their game in America. So they changed it to Tales of Destiny 2.
Right.
I guess to connect it with the other game that had come out at this point, and surely would never be confusing. So this is Tales of Destiny 2. It's the first game in the series that is a direct sequel to another game, Tales of Destiny, if that wasn't obvious. This never made it out of Japan. Whether or not that has anything to do with the title, I'm not sure. However, it has an even more radically changed battle system where instead of having a TP meter to measure how much skills and magic you can use, it's a bar that's called the Spirits bar that decreases when you attack and increases slowly over time and gets cut in half when you're behind your enemies, making it one of the only RPGs in which you can go off sides. But that's Japan only, so sorry. Anyway, now it's the part that we're all here for.
Yay.
It's Tales of Symphonia.
We all remember this game.
And everybody loves this game. And if you have a GameCube, you've either played it or been told to play it. This was a game that was made by a brand new development team. Wolf Team had been bought by Namco at this point, and they renamed it to Namco Tales Studio. And they hired a whole new set of developers. And this set of developers came to be called Team Symphonia because they were the team that made Tales of Symphonia. It was the first game that was in 3D, which is new and exciting, and instead of just being on a 2D plane for fighting, you got all this cool 3D space, and it's new and revolutionary, and you're kind of stuck on a line between your character and the enemy that you're fighting, and that means that if somebody runs between you, you can kind of get stuck on them, and it's not really practical. But it was a great, exciting thing. It's a very good game. And around the same time, this is noteworthy, Tales of Fantasia was remade for a second time, this time on the Game Boy Advance. It was released in Japan a little bit before Tales of Symphonia, kind of to build hype. We'll get back to that, though. Next was Tales of Rebirth, another Japan-only game. This was made by the team that existed before the Symphonia guys, who came to be known as Team Destiny, because they made Tales of Destiny. This game went back to being two-dimensional. However, in battles, there are 3 separate lines that your characters and enemies can be on. You may notice it looks in the screenshot like there's, he's like a bear person or a cat person or something hanging out behind everybody else. And so he's on a separate line from the foreground. And another interesting thing to note is that the combat system in this game is cooldown based. You can have 4 skills assigned at once, and if you use one of them, then it goes on cooldown for a little while, and you have to, make do with your other ones. But again, that's another Japan-only game. But we did get the next one, which is Tales of Legendia. This was not made by the Tales Studio, however. It was made by a group called Project Melfes, which included some Tales Studio people, but was largely composed of people who worked on Tekken and Soul Calibur internally at Namco. Opinions are kind of mixed on this game. Some people, it certainly has its fans. It's got a soundtrack by a person called Go Shina, who took the soundtrack in a completely different direction than it had been before. It's very orchestral, no Hammond organs to be found anywhere. But it's a 2D only game. After everyone was completely wowed by Tales of Symphonia, people were not so fond of this one. It doesn't have co-op play. The voice acting drops out completely after the second half of the game. It's I don't know, it's a grab bag.
It's a weird moment in the history with kind of very little connection to the rest of it. It's also got truly bizarre character design for a Tales game. You've got these 2 asymmetrical pauldrons and weird cross tattoos, and got a monk in a muscle shirt, and it looks. It kind of looks like a Soul Calibur name, huh?
And the monk in the muscle shirt is what threw me off is that he's got the same voice actor as Kratos from Tales of Symphonia, and he doesn't even try to do a different voice or anything. It's just exactly the same.
Yeah, that'd be weird.
We got the next game too. It's Tales of the Abyss. which was made by Team Symphonia, and you can really tell. It plays very similarly to Tales of Symphonia. It's got basically the same 3D battle system, except the big new thing in this one was free run. You can hold down a button on your controller to, run around wherever you want to on the battlefield, which alleviated the problems of getting hung up on, partners and on enemies and stuff.
It's fun. It's a lot like Symphonia. It also, free run, as a fun note, kind of broke the AI in a few ways, because you could free run around the battlefield indefinitely, and your enemies would just chase you, and the rest of your party could just beat them up.
And after this game, we in the US got a game that had been out in Japan for a little while, and it was the Game Boy Advance port of Tales of Fantasia, which is a real treat. If you could play our second video for us. This is the intro to that game in English. Enjoy.
I dwell amidst the abounding light of heaven. Thou art at the gate to the underworld. Come forth, thunder of God. What the heck is that? Indignation!
This is the point at which I would normally say they really tried their hardest, but honestly, I don't think that they did.
I love the mouth flaps in that video.
This is also the only officially translated version of Tales of Fantasia, so if you want to buy a copy of this game and play it in English, that's your option.
Could we go back one slide real quick?
Sure, we can go back one slide.
See that kind of blue furry creature?
Oh, we forgot to talk about him.
That's Neo, and I hate Neo. In a lot of games, there's a mechanic called the Philosopher's Ring, which allows you to go around in dungeons and hit a button and shoot beams. Sorcerer's Ring, sorry, not the Philosopher's Ring. And your Sorcerer's Ring was replaced with this tiny furry abomination. And instead of simply holding up your fist and hearing a little sparkle noise, you would hear a meow every single time you push the button. And you have to do this like 50 times a dungeon. That's completely unrelated. We can keep going.
At the same time as this Tales of Fantasia was coming out in the United States, Japan was getting a remake of Tales of Destiny, which would become kind of the definitive version of that game, and is important to the series in a way that we will discuss later. Have we? Oh, I'm going backwards again. That's why. Then we got Tales of the Tempest. I guess we didn't get it. Japan got it, which was unfortunate for them. This game was not made by Namco Tales Studio. It was made by a company called Dimps. Most famous, I think, for the Sonic Advance and Sonic Rush games. Those games are good, though. This game is not. Oh man, the story it picks up immediately and sort of runs and then just stops really suddenly about 12 hours in and game's over. It's got really lackluster combat. Even the music is not super great. Some of the music is okay, but a lot of it's just not. And it has the unusual distinction of being the only Tales game to have been officially disowned by Namco. Shortly after this game came out, there was a sequel to Tales of Symphonia in development, and in announcing this game, Namco said, hey, we're going to come up with these two categories for categorizing Tales games. There's going to be the main series, which we're calling the Mothership games, and then there's spin-offs, and we're calling those the Escort games. And there had been a bunch of spin-offs, mostly of Tales of Fantasia. They were categorized under Escort games, and so was the sequel to Tales of Symphonia. And Tales of the Tempest was rather quietly put in that second list as well. So it once was a main series game, and sorry, it's not. Don't ever play it. It's bad for you.
Is that the one where the fan dub was released on April Fool's? Is that a joke?
That's true. There is a fan translation that was released as an April Fool's joke because they didn't actually want to translate it, and they kind of did accidentally. But let's move on to happier times. The next game was Tales of Innocence, And after Dimps did what they did to Tales of the Tempest, I am frankly surprised that Namco decided to let an outside company work on one of their games again. But the very next game was made by Alpha System, which is a company that mainly does ports of other companies' games to various consoles, but they had also worked on a game called Radiant Mythology, which is a Tales spin-off game that actually the first game in that series did come out here, and was fairly well received. And they made this game, Tales of Innocence, which was a little bit kind of taking not exactly the Symphonia formula, but a little bit, and putting that onto a handheld. You can have 3 people in your party instead of 4, because more than that would have been too many polygons. And it had what was called a style system, which is a little bit reminiscent of the job system from certain Final Fantasy games, where you can equip styles to your characters, which kind of change how they act in combat, and they can be leveled up independently of the character themselves. This game was remade for the PlayStation Vita in 2012. That remake also didn't make it out of Japan. I believe Namco cited, like, well, Americans aren't buying Tales games, which, I don't know how the market works, but this one never made it out of Japan. There is a fan translation, though, so if that's your style, then have at it. People seem to really like this one, so that's good. And then came Tales of Vesperia, which is very difficult to speak objectively about because it's my favorite game in the series and one of my favorite games.
Yes.
And it's another game by Team Symphonia. And once again, you can really tell it's very reminiscent of Symphonia and Abyss, in that it's got a similar combat system, kind of with more stuff piled on top of it. And it's got like a fun system where you learn skills from equipped weapons and stuff, which reminds me actually an awful lot of Final Fantasy IX, having played that one now. And it's so much fun. It's such a good game.
Yeah. So this one also has a kind of a weird market history because it was originally an Xbox 360 exclusive, and this was a title that sold Xbox 360s in Japan because nobody really wanted them. And then they announced a PS3 version with more stuff in it. And everyone bought that one. The PS3 version with more stuff in it never made it to America, and I'm still mad. You see that blonde guy in the cover? That's Flynn Schifo. In the 360 version, you get to play with him for one fight. In the PS3 version, he's a full party member. And there's a lot of other content.
There's an entire other party member who's not even a character at all in the 360 version.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of cut content for the
stuff that we didn't get, and Namco has asked that we please stop asking them about it.
But you should play this one anyway. It's still really good.
It's still the best game. And after that was Tales of Hearts, which was the first time that the 2 independent development teams within Tales Studio worked together on a game. This was also the first handheld game that was directly made by Tales Studio. And it went back to a 2D style and had an emphasis on like comboing in midair and like tagging in party members for assists. And this one was also remade for the PlayStation Vita. It came out in 2013 and also came out in America, which was great. It's cool that it happened. It doesn't have an English dub, though. And the odd thing is that some character names were changed in the translation, so you can be reading a character, like the main character's name in Japan is Shingu, and in English he's Core, and just reading it and hearing the voice acting can be a strange disconnect. But that's what we get. And the battle system in the Vita remake works pretty differently. It works on kind of a variation of what had been the Tales of Destiny remake system, which actually will become relevant right now because the very next game was Tales of Graces, which brought that Tales of Destiny remake battle system to kind of the modern era. Instead of using a magic meter of sorts, you have what's called chain capacity, or CC for short. And it's just a single number that determines how many things you can do in a fight. So, or in a combo, I should say. So you swing your sword once, that's 1 CC, and let's say you have 5, so you can swing your sword 5 times. Great. Or you can use, arts, which will take more, or sometimes just 1. Or you can, enter a state where you have infinite CC, so you can just combo forever. Really, it's a game about running around and playing really fast and having a good time.
Yeah, this game also, kind of an interesting note, has a beginning section where you play as children. and the game knows you don't want to do this twice because you can skip it in New Game Plus for dirt cheap. It's like 10 grade.
This game was Japan only for a while, and having come fresh off the heels of the PS3 version of Vesperia not coming out in America, I know I was a little bit unhappy with the situation, and a lot of other Western fans of the series were. And it was on the Wii, and we were like, this is never getting translated, is it? And it went a few years until a re-release on the PS3 happened, and that one actually did get translated and released in America. And since then, it's really been Tales heaven.
Yeah, we've had a lot of games.
We've gotten almost all of the ones that have come out since then. And speaking of which, the very next one was Tales of Exilia. And at this point, the Tales of Destiny and Tales of Symphonia teams were merged officially. There was no more real distinction between them within Tales Studio. They worked on this game together. They had 2 separate character designers work on it. It has 2 protagonists, which was a first for the series. And in an interesting idea, you can link together with another character while you're fighting, which means that you're one player controlling 2 characters, and there's certain skills that you can use when you're connected with another person, and it's crazy fun, except for when you're playing multiplayer and player 2 suddenly wonders why his buttons aren't working anymore because his character has just been stolen from him. And it also has a leveling system that is a little bit reminiscent of Final Fantasy again. This time Final Fantasy X in particular. You have a kind of grid of skills that you can activate that will lead like different paths for developing your character, giving you different bonuses and such. And people generally seem to like this one.
Yeah, I think this is the one where one of your party members is gone.
Yeah, that's true. Your Milla, the female protagonist, is actually just God.
Yeah.
And people don't really seem to react to this, which is strange.
Yeah, it's like you meet her
at the beginning of the game.
And she joins the party and it's like, I made the universe. It's like, tight. And then you just go do a JRPG.
That game got a direct sequel with mostly a different cast of characters and a silent protagonist, which was a new thing for the series, although he can become unsilent on a second playthrough. And it also has choices in cutscenes, which was a weird new thing for the series, because generally you don't get that kind of agency in the story, so you can kind of affect the outcome of some things in the story. Aside from that, it was largely the same as Tales of Exilia.
People like this one too. Some
mechanics involving like paying off debt for the entirety of the game that didn't sit well with some people, because you're like always strapped for cash.
Yeah.
And then there was a couple of years without any original games, but we got the remake of Tales of Hearts and Tales of Innocence and the Vita. It was kind of filled the gap there until we got Tales of Zestiria, which was the brand new cool shiny thing in Tales of Zestiria was that battles take place directly on the field, like in dungeons and stuff, and so you don't go to a separate battle screen to fight. You're fighting right there, which means that like your camera gets hung up on scenery and characters, and if you played this game for more than 10 minutes, you know what it's like to be staring at an enemy's butt for an entire battle.
Or just running around a very tiny room trying to hit the same spider.
People had some problems with this one. It wasn't super well received, but it does, again, have its fans.
We're a bit hyperbolically mean to Tales of Zestiria in this overall presentation, but it's it's fine. It just had kind of a lukewarm representation. The character design's cool.
The character design's great. It's not an awful game. It's just not a superb game.
That's fine.
Which I guess at this point is what we're used to. And they seem to have kind of brought it back with Tales of Berseria, which is the newest game. It came out, I think it just was a couple of months ago.
Yeah, it's very recent.
In the US, this game is finally available. And it's technically in the same world as Tales of Zestiria, except it takes place a long, long time ago, some non-specific number of years ago, but probably around 1,000. And it kind of did away with what had been a tradition in the series of what's called the linear battle system. They still call it the linear motion battle system, but it's hardly linear anymore because you're not moving on a line between you and your enemy. You can just kind of free run all the time now. And you can, assign skills to all of the buttons on your controller instead of a direction and a single button. And it's a game about comboing real quick and stealing extra moves from enemies, more or less, and swapping out characters mid-battle. And
everybody likes this one.
Everyone seems to really love it, and that's great, because that means, good stuff for the future of the series.
Yeah, it says here on the slide that he has a darker story compared to the rest of the series. As a point of reference, every person who exists dying is a regular plot point in the Tales series. Like, we have to stop the apocalypse. And,
So, that's a fun thing. We know it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows here. And that kind of brings us to the current day. We've gone through all the main series games. There's a bunch of spin-off games that we'll probably touch on a little bit if we have some extra time afterward. But let's talk about, maybe you have played some of the games in the series, or maybe only one of them, and we know which one it was. Or maybe none of them. But you want to get into it? How do we do that? Well, if you are one of the 12 people who has never played Tales of Symphonia, that's a really good place to start. There are a lot of good starting points, but since this is probably the most popular one, let's go with ways to play it. So it is available on the GameCube, of course. It was also released a couple of years ago on the PS3, bundled with its sequel, and maybe skip that one, or maybe don't. But those are two very easy ways to play it. It's also on Steam. You can get it. It's $5 this weekend, I think. So
it's got all the extra stuff that came in the later PS2 remake, which is available for you if you are a big Tales of Symphonia fan. You want like new hats,
and it's certainly better than it was when it launched. So
and I think
they fixed some of the problems.
There's stability mods, and it's a fine way to play Tales of Symphonia if you want.
So that's a good starting point. It's a simple game to get into. It has an easy-to-understand combat system. It's got a really engaging story, and it's got characters that you love and maybe some that you don't.
Mm-hmm.
That's all of them, though. So perhaps you have played Tales of Symphonia, and you're thinking to yourself, I want to play something that's a little bit like that. Like we mentioned, the other games that were made by Team Symphonia are Tales of the Abyss and Tales of Vesperia, and they are pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
Tales of the Abyss is on the PS2 and the 3DS, and if you can and want to play that game, do it on the 3DS, because the PS2 version, I and some other people I know like to call it Tales of the Loading Screen, because that's what it is. It didn't, they hadn't figured out the PS2, or so, I don't know. The 3DS version is better. Or, of course, play Tales of Vesperia. You could jump into that one as the first game that you play too.
It might set the bar too high.
It's so good. But maybe what you're looking for is not the same thing, but it's something a little bit different.
A brief note about Tales of Vesperia before we all forget it exists. The protagonist of Tales of Vesperia still regularly wins popularity contests for like most popular Tales character.
Yeah, everybody still loves Yuri Lowell.
Yuri Lowell.
He's a cool guy.
And this is Troy Baker.
So let's move on. Games that are a little bit like Tales of Symphonia, but a little bit not. Tales of Eternia is kind of, you could look at it as maybe the prototype for Symphonia, despite the fact that they were made by different teams. It's got a similarly easy to understand combat system where it's relatively simple, TP, traditional mana meter based gameplay, and it's 2D instead of 3D. Which can take a little bit of getting used to because everything can kind of be clustered on screen at once, but at least combat-wise, it's a fairly similar game. And it does show its age a little bit, but not as much as Tales of Destiny does. You can get that on the original PlayStation if you have like $100+ because it's hard to find at this point.
You can probably find it in the dealer's room for a lot of money.
Yeah, maybe.
There's
also a PSP version which came out in Europe. And the PSP is region-free, so if you have one of those and you're really itching to play this game, you can get it from somebody in England, perhaps. Or you can try out Tales of Innocence. It's not exactly the same thing. It's going to be not a huge step, but a step away from Tales of Symphonia. There is no official English version of this game, but there is a comprehensive fan translation. And if you know Japanese, then you can just play it on the DS. That's great. If you want to go all the way to the roots of the series, you can play, if you want to, the first two games. These are games where combat is slow and clunky and they feel like old games. But I think they're still worth playing just to see how far we've come and see where the mechanics that the series is still using today kind of originated.
Mm-hmm. This is the game where magic freezes for the entire duration of magic?
Yeah. If you're in Tales of Fantasia, for most of the game, 3 of your 4 party members are spellcasters, and every time they cast a spell, the entire battle freezes except for that spell. You have to wait for it to be over, and then your next spellcaster will cast a spell, and so on and so forth. It's a slog, but it is still a good game. If you're going to play Tales of Fantasia, play the Super Famicom version or the original PlayStation version. Those are ones that have translations available and are not the Game Boy Advance one.
Yeah, if you are not bothered by old JRPGs, you will not be bothered by these old JRPGs. But if you are, these will not sway you. They're interesting, but...
if those are so completely not your style, because you want to punch things very, very fast, these are the games for you. I think Tales of Berseria, is that one on the PS3 in the US? I don't think it actually is. Only Japan. So yeah, these are the most recent games in the series. They all work on more or less the same battle system, the chain capacity system that I mentioned when talking about Tales of Graces. Exilia and its sequel and Hearts are a little bit different because they also have the old-style TP meter in addition to basically an equivalent of the chain capacity. And to be frank, I'm not certain why exactly they made that choice, because it's just 2 limiting factors on your spells, but it does work.
You can get a couple of these on the PlayStation Store if you want to get them digitally instead of having to track down a physical copy.
I believe you can get all of them on the PlayStation Store.
Oh, really?
And Berseria is also on PC, and good news, it runs a lot better than the PC version of Symphonia does. It's also on sale on Steam, but since it's new, they don't give it that big of a discount. I think it's like $55 or something.
Ooh.
Maybe the language that you know is Japanese. And if that's the case, I'm sorry I've been speaking English this whole time and you don't know what I'm saying. But these are games that never came out in America and don't have an in-game translation. Some of these have scripts online that people have written up that you can follow, and some of them have menu translations, so you can play the game and not experience the story. I included the PS2 version of Tales of Destiny here because I think if you were going to play a single one of these, that might be an interesting one to check out, simply because it's where the current day battle system kind of came from, and it has been cited as like the way to experience Tales of Destiny.
Tales of Hearts got a remake that has very different combat, so if you want to play the original combat, you have to do it in Japanese.
Yep. And finally, we have maybe the games to skip.
We're a little mean here. Some of these are okay.
Tales of Legendia and Tales of Zestiria, I can't actually say, I don't recommend you play these games, because they're still perfectly playable. The 2 in the middle, though, Tales of Fantasia on the Game Boy Advance, absolutely skip it. And Tales of the Tempest, play it if you like bad things. I do. I love bad things. And let me tell you, that game is a real treat. But, don't touch Game Boy Advance Fantasia. It's not good. We have kind of gone through all of the main series games, and we still have a little bit of extra time, so do we want to talk about what some of the spin-offs are?
Right, because there are enough of them to fill like an entire another panel or 2. There are so many spin-off games.
I don't have a slide for them, but some interesting spin-offs of note. Let's see. There's an entire series that's spun off of the very first game, Tales of Fantasia. They're called Narikiri Dungeon, and they're dungeon crawler games where the gimmick is that your main characters can change costumes, which basically gives them the abilities of different characters from different Tales games. My favorite, of course, being the Wonder Chef costume. You can just be the Wonder Chef in a dungeon crawler, which is rad. I think there are 3 or 4 of those. The very first one was on, I want to say, the Game Boy Color.
I think that's right, yeah.
There's a notable remake of it on the PSP. It's called Narikiri Dungeon X, or I suppose you'd pronounce it Cross, which includes a full remake of Tales of Fantasia in a more modern battle system. but that one doesn't. There's been a fan translation in the works for like 6 years now. It's kind of stalled. What other spin-offs do we have? There's the Tales of the World, Radiant Mythology. The first one of those is available in English, and it's kind of side quests the video game. You've got a hub world, and your like original character, Please Do Not Steal, and all of these different Tales characters are like, hey, help me do my laundry, or go kill 5 chickens, or I'm just making stuff up.
Fetch me that book.
And it's a cool crossover game where you get characters from different Tales games in your party, and it was made by the same company that made Tales of Innocence, and people really like it. I think there are 3 of those, but only the first one has ever actually been available in the United States.
There's Tales of Versus.
There's Tales of Versus.
Which is the fighting game spin-off where you have all the different characters all fighting each other, which is an incredibly natural progression of the Tales combat system. And
it really is.
I don't think you can play those here.
No. The only spin-offs that are actually available officially available in English are the first Radiant Mythology and Dawn of the New World, the Tales of Symphonia sequel, which is a spin-off game, I think largely because its mechanics are so completely different from Tales of Symphonia. It's got a similar battle system, but it's also Pokemon. You capture monsters and train them to fight for you. And all of the cast of Tales of Symphonia is there. It's great, except they only join your party temporarily, and you can never level them up, and Kratos isn't there, and he's the best part of that game, so why even bother?
Other interesting notes is the Namco releasing games which are not technically Tales games, but they play a lot like Tales games. There's one where everybody is a Kamen Rider, and there's one where everyone is from Sergeant Frog. Those are also not in English, which should surprise nobody.
The Sergeant Frog game is pretty notable because that was I don't know if I want to say it was like a big name game in Japan, but it certainly wasn't a no fanfare game, and it really is kind of just a Tales game, except you are like Sergeant Frog and all of the various other frogs of Sergeant Frog.
You've seen, if you haven't seen the show, it's like 9 frogs.
Is there anything else that we have that we can?
We have time for questions, but we're not experts.
Does anyone have any questions about these games that we can try to answer?
Sweet.
Well, all right then. Our game is over, and hopefully we will be heard from again. But that pretty much wraps it up for us.
Yeah, if you're really into Tales and you want just more Tales content, there's another Tales panel happening this weekend that we are not involved with.
Yeah, there's a panel 2 hours from now. I can't remember. Yeah, at 3 p.m. And I can't remember what room it's in, but it's a different panel that is not run by us, and they kind of like to focus a little bit more on the story aspects of the games. It's a pretty fun time. There you go, the Heinz 302, 304.
Please check your schedules for Tales.
What else is there? If you're really itching for Tales community, I don't know. I hang out on the Tales Reddit. There's the r/Tales subreddit, and they've got a Discord chat. That's a lot of fun.
Remember when we made a parallel Tales of subreddit, not knowing about the main one, and then it got folded back into the main one?
Yeah, it was weird. Yeah. What a weird time on Reddit, which is a description of anything on Reddit. Yeah. But that, I think, about does it for us. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, I'll get you time.
Enjoy the rest of the convention, and maybe play a Tales game or two.
If you like the panel, go tell Anime Boston about it on the forums. Or don't.